Welcome our sponsor, RSM, to Tony Fulton to come and tell us a bit about RSM.
For those of you who don't know RSM, we're a global professional services firm. We specialise in providing tax, audit and consulting services and have a presence in over 120 countries, which means that we can connect people with clients and their needs seamlessly cross-border. So question, why did RSM sponsor this morning's roundtable? Look, we're very pleased to be associated with TechBoard. This is the fourth in the series of roundtables, and we're very passionate about the technology sector and certainly understand the importance of securing funding for the fintech industry in particular. We're quite active in the fintech ecosystem, helping companies to connect investors and fintech sector, as well as helping companies to secure the necessary funding they need. Across our firm, we can assist in various stages of the life cycle for a fintech. So I'm a tax partner and provide advice to startups through small corporates in getting your structure right. And it's quite crucial to make sure you have the right structure to begin with. They're awfully difficult to change later, and it's conversations I have every day. Our R&D services can assist you with getting access to the R&D tax concession, and as many in the room will know, that's quite crucial from a cash funding perspective and can support you in getting underway at the most crucial stage of your development. In other areas, as you progress, you may need my colleague here, Marvin, from our audit area, who can help you with regulatory compliance, and hopefully as you grow, potentially audit requirements down the track. We also have an extensive consulting service that can support you in areas such as risk advisory, cyber security and the like. So I guess we're horses for courses. We have someone to assist you in each stage of your development. I hope you enjoy the session today, and look forward to having a conversation with you after the session. I'll hand back to Peter. Thank you.
And so I'm going to give a bit of a presentation about TechBoard and why we do what we do, and also about a report that we published overnight. TechBoard is Australia's startup and young tech company funding company. We've been around for a little while. TechBoard started as a Western Australian focused platform to raise the profile of startups and tech companies in WA. It started in 2015, and it started off as a directory with an announcements platform, and to get attention on what we were doing, we started tracking metrics on companies, and we're publishing a ranking of the extent to which companies were trending. So we were looking at social media, web rank, number of employees, let's see, a bunch of other things, app reviews, etc. We were doing that, and we started off by publishing a fortnightly ranking, and went monthly when we went Australia-wide in 2017. And so you've got Prosper topping the ranking one period, Unlocked when they were still around, Health Engine, big WA one. And we also published interviews that were with various founders and investors. We sort of moved on from that a little bit. Beginning of 2017, we decided, okay, we're collecting all of this data for the ranking, let's publish some of it. It might be interesting and useful. So we started publishing funding reports on a quarterly basis. For the December quarter 2016 was the first, that was just WA data. And we were also publishing this month in Startup and Tech, but that's something we're no longer doing. We're focusing just on the funding data now. So this is images of some of our previous reports. Our data's getting quoted quite broadly. We've been collaborating with Startup Oz for the last 2 years. Our data will be in the Crossroads report again this year. and quoted by Austrade, and in a report put out by Westpac. Had pretty good press coverage, so getting the story out about the startup and tech ecosystem, which is great. And shot some press release yesterday. Not sure where we're going to get covered for the report, but hopefully, definitely Startup Daily. I'm not sure about the others. So our focus is we're a data company. We collect this data in a number of ways. Semi-automated scraping, we scrapers, crawlers. We have a list of 3,400 companies we're monitoring. We add new companies whenever we find funding events for them. And we publish, we collect that data on a quarterly basis currently and sell access to subscribers. And these are our early customers. Started off with Department of Industry, Innovation and Science, but we're working to move more into corporate space. So corporates, investors, speaking to, we've got a number of trials out at the moment. So I'll get on to the report. This report covers the financial year just gone, and is our second annual funding report that we've done. So in terms of some headline figures, pretty big numbers. Last year we picked up 3.5 billion, so it's almost doubled to 6.8 billion. 836 funding events, 710 companies, and last year we found private investment, public investment and debt were all about $1 billion each. Private investments really rocketed up since last year. And I mean, the other sectors have grown as well in size, but proportionally it's dropped down. Massive acquisition in the form of PEXA, which was in one of our earlier reports, 1.6 billion. It's not the normal startup and tech story, but was government owned, now private owned, so it was effectively privatised, and its main owned as a Commonwealth Bank company with the others off the top of my head. But fintech was big last year, it's bigger this year. So this is, I'll come back to fintech focus on in a few slides' time, but this gives you a sense of where the funding is going in terms of the band of size band, and where we've seen the most growth. So the top line of the two things, so it's 17, 18 at the top, then 18, 19 repeated below. So the top is number of events, the bottom is the value. And so we've seen really the most growth at the very top end of the market, which is fintech. We'll come back to that though. And all of the sectors generally have grown, apart from the 5 to 10 billion range. Slightly different story in the fintech space though. You can't see this very well, but the top line is fintech. This is by category, so we categorise companies into 43 different categories, and so that enables us to do this filtering and the like. And this is number of events by funding type and value by funding type across the different funding types. So private is on the left and the biggest. And all of these graphs have been taken straight from the report, so that's available on the website. And funding by state. Last year, New South Wales was well ahead, but Victoria has really taken, and a large part of the Victoria is linked to PEXA as a Victorian company, and you've got all of the Victorian fintechs that getting the highest amount of funding at the very top end of the market, so Judo Bank, for example. So this is private investments across the board, not just fintech. And so you've got the 100 mil plus, which didn't exist before this year, and now it's right up there. So, actually, no, this, yeah, sorry, that is, and so fintech funding, this is slightly different from the across the board, and this is not just in private investment, this is all funding types. You'll notice the drops are in the 50 to 100 mil space. So this is, the largest companies perhaps are moving. This is one of the things that we'll explore around the table. And the other segment that drops is not as obvious. It's the 15 to 20 mil space, but all of the others are growing. Fintech funding by state. Victoria's way outstripping New South Wales in terms of dollar value, but there are more funding events in New South Wales, 48 to 31. And this is just a snapshot of each of the states and showing you where we're getting these figures from. So the top one's Victoria, Judo Bank, Afterpay, Moola, Air Wallets, Judo Bank, Afterpay, Air Wallets. So they're the largest funding events for Victorian companies. And you'll notice there's only one of those that isn't fintech lending. So Judo Bank, well, it's not just lending, but that's a large part of its business. If you look at New South Wales, obviously Prosper is up there, Get Capital, Prosper again. So this is all funding type, so that was its bridging round prior to the IPO. And the other states, you'll see the size of funding well, we've already got picked up events in 3 states, Queensland, WA, South Australia. The scale is just much smaller at this point. And this is fintech funding by funding type. Private is the largest, closely followed by debt, which is again all around the lending. And top 10 companies by dollars raised privately in so this is the different funding types. So, unsurprisingly, Judo Bank, Air Wallets, Prosper Lending. For placements, Afterpay was 459 million over the year. Zipco at 47, and Judo Bank, Moola, Helio Lending, Duncom, Get Capital, all there as well on the debt side. So we've done some analysis also of the investors, and we looked at investors that have backed fintech and number of funding events of more than one. If we'd gone to one, we'd have the Meyer family up here as well, because they invested in one of the Judo rounds. There's a fair bit of foreign money coming in there. The Sequoia's backed 3 companies, Credit Suisse 2, and then quite a large group backing the Air Wallets raises. So in terms of Australian investors, the biggest, well, very pleased to have one of the big ones represented in the room. NAB Ventures, or Reinventure as well. And so this is just investments in Australian companies over the period. And so that's the end of the overview of the report. I encourage you all to go and have a look if you're interested. Most of our data at the moment we collect ourselves, but people are reporting deals to us. We really encourage investors and companies to look to report deals to TechBoard so that we can deliver the best data. We don't currently have an awfully strong value proposition for companies, but we're working to strengthen that by helping investors with their analysis and helping them find deals to invest in. So that will hopefully strengthen as time goes on. And now I would welcome the panel who are standing around the back.
We'll have a conversation amongst ourselves, obviously, for the benefit of everyone in the room, but I want to make sure that there's enough time for us to be able to throw to questions. Obviously, everyone here has had a chance to quickly review the report, and there's a whole range of discussions. But first of all, I'd like to introduce who's around the table. I'll do that quickly at a high level, but then we'll go around the circle to just give a bit of a sense of your background and perhaps exposure to fintech learning in particular, given this is one of the satellite events for Fintech Australia's Intersect conference. To start with myself, my name is Lauren Kaplan. I am partner of platform and operations for Reinventure Group, but also a board member of Fintech Australia. So very pleased to be able to represent both of those parties today for this TechBoard roundtable rather. To my left, I have Vicky Papachristos, an experienced company director and angel investor with Scale. Next to her, Nick Baker, an associate at NAB Ventures, one of our friendly CVC compadres. William Wong, co-founder of Liven, which is a blockchain-based dining rewards app. Of course, Peter needs no introduction at this point. Thank you for bringing us all together, Peter. Matt Vitale, co-founder of equity crowdfunding platform Virtual. Rhys Davies, co-founder of Fresh Equities, a marketplace that gives access for private placement share issues to individual investors. Hopefully that's a good enough elevator pitch. And Ben Hensman, a senior associate at Square Peg Capital, another extremely active fintech investor and general venture capital investor based here in Melbourne. And last but not least, Tim Dean, a fellow Fintech Australia board member, board director, and founder of relationship learning platform Credit. So please, everyone, welcome our roundtable this morning. Now, I would like each of you to be able to kind of elaborate a little bit more on your own kind of background and experience, and perhaps Vicky, we'll start with you. What's your kind of, how long have you been involved in investing perhaps, and is fintech specifically something that you've been seeing emerging as a really strong area of interest lately?
Thank you. My background is pretty straightforward or pretty straight. I come from the great suit category of corporate. I started life as a chem eng and then went into Shell, Westpac, several other big corporates, moved into state and overseas. I actually ran a startup ran the regional headquarters in North Americas for a while for an Australian startup in the smart card industry back in the previous tech boom in the 2000s, and worked that was basically a fintech product. And then we had the 11th of September, so that all went a bit pear-shaped. Came back and worked again in the financial services area as well, further on there, and my background is mainly in marketing. I've kind of zipped in and out of the corporate world the last few years. I'm a company director on about 3 or 4 boards, been on several others, FPOS and a few others. And I also, in the meantime, discovered my passion for helping young women and women generally in progressing. So I joined Scale Investors, which is a female-led angel investment group, and we only invest in female entrepreneurs or companies that are startup-led by women. And I got jobbed into doing this today because nobody else is available. Probably also because I have invested in a couple of, not just fintech, but intratech and tech businesses within Scale. So I have quite a lot of interest in the space. So that's my experience in a way with the fintech, apart from all the DD work we do. And if there's anyone out there, we have Scale Males as well. We're a lovely group to work with, and it's a passion project. So and we can talk more about what excites us about the investor, as investors for that space.
Fantastic, thanks Vicky. I might pass to Tim next, actually welcome. But it'd be interesting to reflect when we kind of get deeper into the conversation on what you're seeing now compared to sort of that first dot-com era, the bubble, you shall not be named, and if there are any similarities with what we're seeing now as well. So we'll jump back to that. Tim.
Thank you. Tim Dean from Credit. I'm here probably for 2 reasons. One is I went through an equity crowdfunding round this year, so I've got a perspective on that. Secondly, our platform provides the mechanism for people to borrow and lend to each other, friends and family. Okay, and we all know that one of the biggest sources of finance for startups getting off the ground is to go and tap at people they know. So we provided infrastructure to enable that transaction to happen. Now, you may surprise everyone that the average loan on our platform is $80,000 and the interest rate is 3%. So mates rates money is probably the best deal in town. And for a lot of people, they don't have the access to get onto the ladder of funding. So for us, I suppose, credit is the bottom of the pyramid. It is the starting off of the ladder for a lot of companies, a lot of tech entrepreneurs who want to get going.
It's the friends, family, and fools round.
Say again?
The friends, family, and fools round, but taking care of in a nice infrastructure.
It absolutely. It's often the only place people who've got a dream and ambition can start off with is to find people who are back, and we just make it a lot easier. So we see a lot of these transactions day to day, and one of the things we're doing this year is we're making the platform available to all the hubs for free, so that we're going to give anyone who wants to get going no barrier to enable them to do that transaction right. So we're at the starting point, and then obviously there's leading as well.
Awesome, thanks Tim. Over to Ben.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. SquarePeg Capital is an investor in Australia, Israel, and Southeast Asia. We're an early stage technology investor with check sizes ranging from sort of $1 million US through to $10 million US for a first investment. And what that translates to is companies who are very early in their journey, they're pre-revenue or pre-MVP in some cases. Everything from deeply technical to consumer businesses. We're very broad, but one area where we do focus in Australia in particular is financial services. It's one of Australia's unique strengths. We've got an enormous, in terms of the size of our economy and the size of our population, we have an incredibly large and profitable financial services sector, both in terms of the profit pools, but also in terms of the cost pools. There's a huge amount of expertise in this country. There aren't necessarily a huge amount of founders who have both deep domain expertise and an incredible ability to start something from scratch. We're really looking for those founders. We're doing that across the board. We're looking and have invested in home loans, in small business lending, Athena and Prosper respectively, in payments, both kind of local and cross-border, Air Wallets and Stripe, and also looking beyond that in areas of embedded finance where there are ways that software can improve visibility and understanding of things like supply chains to improve the quality of lending and the risk that the lender is taking. And we continue to see really, really exciting trends in Australia, really high quality of founders. And as a long-term investor who wants to back them multiple times, it's really exciting to see that cream at the top continue to get larger and larger, and the support from the investor community get larger as well. So look forward to the conversation.
Over to Nick.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks everyone for having me here. I'm Nick Baker. I'm a reformed tech investment banker from the US. Came back and joined my family as an investor there for a while, and then subsequently joined NAB Ventures. So for those who don't know, NAB Ventures is a $100 million fintech-focused fund to support innovation in the financial services sector, both within Australia and internationally. So we have about a third of our investments outside of Australia, but 2/3 within. Fintech is our bread and butter, but we will invest in anything which is strategically relevant to the bank. So that could be reg tech, cyber security, anything data related, and pretty much anything you think which would be relevant. And we're really fortunate that we have that as the bank as a platform that I like to think of it as a magic trick for creating value. We can kind of make an investment in a company and then hopefully do a bunch of things, be it integrate into a banking platform, help with distribution, pull subject matter experts onto the board. As an example, our recent investment into Digital Shadows, we brought a Chief Enterprise Security Officer, David Fairman, who is an adjunct rock star in the cybersecurity space, and pulled him onto their board to try and add value to that company. Of course, by being investors, we get to get both the strategic benefit of that by bringing folks closer into the bank and a little less adversarial and more of a partnership, as well as we obviously see the financial upside to creating value there.
Was there a reason fintech attracted you in terms of your canvassing the VC space when you came back to Australia?
Well, I mean, exactly Ben's point before. It's I think that fintech in Australia is such a big space because it follows financial services and how large part of the economy in Australia financial services is. It's also an area that really hasn't been disrupted. Like if you look at, well, yeah, it hasn't, not quite yet. If you look at areas like media, that was kind of disrupted 10, 15, almost 20 years ago. Whereas there still hasn't been that level of disruption in the fintech market. So if there's a place in the world to do fintech, Australia is probably it, and it's just such an exciting space to be in at the moment.
Thank you. William?
I didn't realize how small. So I was an ex-lawyer and had a lot of interest in technology and banking and finance. Did my year of home trading with 4 screens, options, warrants, forex, you name it. Didn't quite understand the fundamentals of economics, the supply and demand of the fiscal policies. Just self-taught myself, went to the masters in banking and finance. Not because I wanted to do what I do right now, but just out of sheer curiosity. And one thing led to another. It led me found in a company, Liven, which is a 5-year-old company right now, serving about 600,000 users and about 1,000 restaurants here. But the core principle underpinning that is creating a universal alternate currency in the midst of all central bank issued currencies. So what we see is, at the end of the day, technology is as good as its help the people, the actual end users. So whereas there are a lot of smart people focusing on the technology layers, we saw ourselves as that we don't have the deep domain expertise in building that infrastructure. But what we do know is how to actually turn that into something more usable, how to make this make more sense to the end user. So alluding to the blockchain technology, the revolution that is happening right now, a lot of people may not know this, but this technology, as we, if you are deep into this, people who have been in this space, it's got all the fundamental pillars that may replace or can compete quite aggressively with the current financial system. So what this means is that we are entering into this space with the consumer technology, and this is a very exciting space for us, and it has allowed us humbly, we never expected that we'll be here, but at the beginning of the year we won the blockchain, as the only Australian company to have won the blockchain and payment tech vertical on the Richard Branson's Extreme Tech Challenge. I wasn't there to present. My sister Grace, who was supposed to be here, but she bailed out and she couldn't make it because of the plane delay, so I'm sitting in. So I think the background of fintech for me and for our company is incredibly exciting space, because as you know, money is what we are all, the human race is so clever in the sense that we created something out of nothing through credit, through lending, and that's what we are all here about, in providing some sort of financing. Not your money, but some future money so that we can progress towards it. So the whole area is exciting, and where we are right now is creating this global digital nation. And I believe in the next 5-10 years, we're going to see very different kind of companies. We're going to see very different kind of countries that is actually borderless, but in a way, segmented by their sectors. So instead of having Australia, China, Malaysia, Singapore, we'll see food, travel, accommodation, sort of, that the world is developing this way. So, yeah, I'm excited to talk more about that.
Thank you. Reece, tell us a bit more about Fresh Equities?
Hi everyone, I'm Reece, I'm one of the co-founders of Fresh Equities, which is a platform which helps qualified investors get access to public placements. My involvement in fintech, we actually started out as a company called DealPad 2 years ago, which was trying to help reduce the friction in running private capital raises. What we learned through that process is the problem wasn't necessarily that the process is hard, the problem is it's really hard to discover the investors who are already bought into your story. So through that process, we were challenged by an investor, why are you doing this in private when there's all these public companies running capital raises that seem to be very controlled in terms of access, etc. Come at this with first principles, we didn't have a background in capital markets, let's see if there's a problem here. And over the last 12 months, we've taken a sector which has about 8 billion in Australia through private placements every year. There's about 800 deals, or 600 deals, run by about 150 different lead brokers, and the largest broker has about 8% of those deals. Currently, we have 56% of all deals in Australia on the platform, and a growing investor base who are accessing through it. So we've kind of had experience in the fintech space, both on the private and public side, and really starting to understand from first principles how those markets work and what some of the challenges are, particularly in Australia, with capital raising in the public market.
And when you say qualified investors, is that the sophisticated investors?
Yeah, so public placement legislation in Australia is you have to be a sophisticated investor to participate, which is
The thresholds.
a whole series of thresholds, yeah.
Thank you. And Matt?
So my name's Matt, I'm from Birchall. We're an equity crowdfunding platform. We received our license among the first tranche of licensees when the regime commenced in January last year. It's early days for equity crowdfunding still. Australia took a long time compared to its global peers to implement equity crowdfunding legislation. We look to the UK as probably the most mature market for equity crowdfunding, and hundreds of millions of pounds are turned over through platforms there every year, and that's, I suppose, the success that we'd like to emulate here. Just some stats on the equity crowdfunding industry. There's been just over 50 deals completed in the last 18 months. It's about $36 million, so it's still very early days. There's about 30,000 investors that hold crowdsourced funding securities. As a platform, we've chosen to focus on businesses that have a strong consumer proposition and really kind of making the most of the two key game changers of the regime that we see, and that is retail participation and the ability to advertise these offers online, which can't be overstated. So.
Do you want to add anything, Peter, or are you happy?
Not really, although I'm just really pleased that we're able to get such a broad representation of the whole funding
The cross
space.
section, yeah.
Yeah, and some of Australia's top investors. I mean, SquarePeg wasn't on that list for the last year, but in terms of VCs in Australia, it's SquarePeg and Airtree that are the two leading fintech investors. And just announced the 340 mil fund. So it's exciting, and exciting very much for all being involved.
So I'm going to generally ask some questions of the whole group and just encourage you all to kind of grab the mic, put your hand up, I'll try to share it around, and then I'll have some targeted questions for some of you. For everyone in the audience, if you do have questions, I'll probably take the conversation for about 20 minutes or so, but have a pause to have you jump in. If there's anything urgent or burning that's relevant to the topic we're discussing, just give me an extra wave and I'll try and throw it to you. But first of all, I'd really just like to throw to everyone, to get some, we've had like 24 hours extra kind of access to the report to get a sense of the landscape. And of course, we being in this industry are generally aware of the movements through the year as well. What are some initial reactions on the huge increase in funding across the board, not just with fintech, not just with private investment? How are we feeling about the investment landscape in Australia over the last financial year? Any takers first? When did you get back, Nick, by the way? How long have you been back in Australia, just out of interest?
I've been back for a few years.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So you've seen a couple of, the growth between...
Yeah, I definitely have. I think that the growth in the market is terrific, just in the sense that it provides a whole lot of exposure. You know, it's always the headline things that gain broader exposure, you know, that like get written up in the papers and everyone knows about. And so what it does is it encourages new startups, and it's always whenever you see something that I think, you know, gives people an understanding of what is possible, and so it encourages potential founders out there to maybe quit their job and start a new thing.
It feels like the journalists don't get out of bed for seed raises anymore as well, so we're only really hearing about the big ones, right?
Yeah, that's it. And you know, I think that it's something which is actually in line with what's happening in the rest of the world, more broadly, not just in fintech. You're seeing that later stage companies are taking a much larger portion of the overall funding pie, and part of that is because you have later stage companies are getting more funding, because there are larger funds and larger, more dedicated funds into late stage investors, into late stage investing. Internationally, that's sort of quite been crowded out by things like the Vision Fund. But in Australia, we're seeing, and it's not necessarily just traditional VCs, although obviously we'll fold on into rounds. Obviously, we want to back out successful investments, but it's things like co-investors such as super funds that, you know, now that something has been validated, and particularly with lending, which is a fairly well-trodden business model, they become much more comfortable. And the same thing happens with, say, family offices and other sort of institutional level investors that have a lot of capital. They don't necessarily have the resources to be putting $5 million or $1 million checks to work at an early stage, but if they've got to put 10, 20, $50 million to work at one point in time, they can get sort of more comfortable, given that there are other sophisticated early stage investors in the market.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think what really excites us is just the depth that we're seeing. So we've, as I said earlier, we've invested in a bunch of areas, but if you step back and look at where funding is going across the whole ecosystem, it's not just kind of at the individual product level, where, you know, individual profit pools are being specifically targeted by startups. It's at the infrastructure layer as well. Clearly, people are identifying that there are gaps in, you know, the plumbing of what our new financial system will look like, and it's great to see companies coming up and targeting that specifically, making sure that there's a third-party tool that covers that area. You know, that has been something we've seen with companies like Stripe Payments. You know, there's an enormous amount of depth in what they've been doing in the pipes and the plumbing, but also in areas like KYC and AML.
And CDR will be coming down the pipe as well, I guess, you know, the compliance with the new open banking regime.
Yeah, and it's really, really exciting. I mean, and not just in traditional banking or consumer banking, but in business banking and superannuation. The superannuation system is hideously complex and heavily paper-based and people-based, and the inefficiency and simple things like changing your address and changing your insurance preferences. And it's just, when you learn about these things for the first time, we've been spending a bit of time in the space recently, it's extraordinary how mad it is and how little innovation has gone on. But we're seeing some really interesting companies in that space. So, and great to see a diversity in funding for all of those different stages as well. I think probably with the exception of the earliest stage, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point today. But insurance is probably another area. There's just not a lot happening in insurance. And there are specific reasons why it's hard in terms of risk pooling and the obvious diseconomies to scale that you don't see in other areas. But you know, I think that'll be the next area where we see a lot of new companies coming forward. Really exciting.
Yeah. I guess we've seen some mega rounds, and traditionally that perhaps is suggesting that the whole ecosystem is maturing. You know, we're seeing growth stage rounds, but in fact, a lot of those larger rounds have been newer companies as well, particularly you know, some of the square peg investments. You know, they've just required a lot of capital, especially in this fintech space, to get up and running. Are there any thoughts generally around you know, appetite to take these bigger risks for earlier stage companies?
Yeah, look, I think we. I'll use a thing at home loans as an example. I mean, first backed that business in April last year, and they were a year out from launch. They hadn't written a pilot loan yet, but they were selling mortgages, which is an established market, so there's sort of not a lot of risk around that. It's one of the world's largest single markets in terms of profits. So you're kind of not taking so much risk on that. It's more, who are these people and why are they the right people to create something really special and reinvent this product, which everybody hates. Everybody except for mortgage brokers and other folks who do really well off it. But it's incredible how many startups have tackled the mortgage space and only made incremental changes or small improvements that for the consumer is just not really cutting the mustard. And what we saw with Athena was a full stack approach that required a lot of capital up front. And we really focused on understanding what that meant. But most of all, we focused on the key people.
That there were people with track record, as you mentioned before, people who are leaving these industries with deep domain expertise in financial services to have a crack.
They had deep domain expertise, but they also had Michael Starkey, who's co-founder of iSelect, the CTO, Pete Giorgio, spent 7 years at Atlassian. And that's just a couple of examples when they pulled together an incredible group of senior people to start the business. You don't see very often, but it's kind of essential when you're tackling such a large piece in financial services. And Airwallex was very similar. Their 5 co-founders had an incredible level of experience, but the ability to start from scratch incredibly quickly, learn really quickly. So we've got a very large appetite to do those sorts of investments. And that first round, we haven't disclosed our proportion of it, but it was a $14.5 million round. The subsequent round was a $25 million round. So there's plenty of appetite for us. And obviously we have a reasonably large fund. We do go early though, so it's not one size fits all.
Something else you mentioned there is interesting, just around, yes, that the whole market is maturing, but we're actually getting to that second generation almost of, operators with experience at other startups, which was something we didn't have 5 years ago. They were very much first-time founders, and that changes things as well. Were you going to comment?
Yeah, I was basically going to say just that, which seems to be, like, when I started working in startups 12 years ago, it very much felt like a separate category. It was sort of like the minor leagues and the major leagues was corporate, and now that seems to have shifted quite a bit because we've got founders or people who have worked in startups that have gone through that growth phase now reinvesting into the system, both financially and their time, which was part of the early problem, which is you didn't have experts in specific areas or people who had grown something, so everyone was kind of like fumbling for the first time. And now it feels like there's a lot more maturity in terms of the people who put their hand up to come and join at an earlier stage, which is really spectacular.
And you're seeing that in terms of the placements that are being offered, are they the kinds of businesses that you're seeing open up to this kind of opportunity as well?
Well, that was more my experience working. So we were based out of Stone Shore until the middle of the year, just seeing the types of people who are now founding stuff and the types of people who are joining companies at an earlier stage, which is not the type of employees that I would have expected 10 years ago to see people. Yeah.
Well, I guess that let's look at the other end of the spectrum then. There's the really early stage, perhaps particularly Vicky and Matt and Tim, I think your perspective on this would be interesting. What are we seeing at that earlier stage? Are there more experienced founders coming through? Are we still seeing that very early stage, first timers just wanting to have a crack in this space?
Yeah, my experience has been on both sides. It's been some really hardcore, experienced professionals know what they're doing. They basically said, look, enough of what I'm doing now. I'm now ready to, and I've got this mega idea, and there's one particular we've invested in, which is in the insurance technology space, Galileo platforms, and it's in, they're getting some great success in microinsurance space and in new products with in new markets, and very much Asian-based, where they're having not trouble, but they're not getting the crack through here in Australia because they're such a staid, boring, conservative industry. So, and this isn't just in the insurance space. This is, in the super space, a whole bunch. They're just so swamped with what they've got to do on a day-to-day basis. They can't see the wood for the trees, and even getting existing businesses. If you go in for a new loan these days, you have to reinvent yourself to the bank that you've been with for 20 years, and you go, this is ridiculous. And so changing that game is really important. And the people we're seeing in some of the biggest and the startups at the early stage are fabulous. They're experienced, they know what they're doing. But then converse to that, we've had a couple of businesses, early stage, Wayne Institute, little freaks, and their ability to think of something is fantastic. Their ability to see it through is non-existent. It's, they're totally lacking resilience. So, and this is one of the things that I think scale brings to the party. I'm sure Squeak Peg does in a very different way, but a very capable, strong way as well. Is we have a bunch, there's about 150 plus of us at scale, and we're all these, mad, smart, enthusiastic individuals who go, I know that person, I know how to do this, I know how to do that, and half of our challenge is being able to implant ourselves effectively, not because we don't know what to do or we don't know how to do it. It's that you're all still very busy people. We have a lot of capability. We don't want to interrupt, and we don't want to stifle and overdo the engagement. And also we find on the other side the entrepreneurs or the startup people, queens, whatever you call them, women, they have our money and they go, we've already got your money, we just don't really want to waste any more of your time. So it's about how do you have that conversation and have an engagement that's efficient and well thought through. But the people are talented, I think, from what I've seen. And for me, it's more how do I encourage more of that? How do I bring... And I do some work with young girls from McGraw, and the ideas are amazing. Their experience is non-existent. I mean, they're little kids at school, so they're fabulous, but they don't have what, this bunch of people can bring to the party. So there's a lot of work that can be done, and there's a lot of opportunity. So, yeah.
What are you seeing in terms of Creddy's kind of borrowers?
Yeah, look, I have a slightly different perspective in the sense that I see the funding polarising. I think some of the larger funds are just wanting to put bigger deals together, and therefore it's kind of stretching out. And I think the challenge for the startup is to, as you said, they have a lot of ideas and enthusiasm, but they have no cut through in terms of execution. And if you think they don't have any experience in terms of execution, they have absolutely less experience in how to raise money. Right, so they will plug themselves into a sort of like an environment of capital raising, and it is just literally square pegs round holes all the time. So I think one of the things that we can evolve to in sort of this community is to help improve the traffic lighting system so that the companies that are raising funds are perhaps better matched at the point of entry. I mean, I heard something last year where a fund was saying, look, we invest in like only 1% of the deals we see. I thought that's embarrassing to hear that actually, because that means that 99 people are wasting their time having a conversation. And I came back from the States like 2 weeks ago, and in fact you're having the funds that are saying, look, we only do B2B, or we only do B2C. They're actually even getting into these pools of types of investments. So in Australia we do have a number of generalists who are sort of fitting into a more comfort size, but for the company entering into that, as I said, the traffic lighting system could be improved so that, frankly, they spend less time talking to people who are less interested in talking to them, and everyone can have probably better cut-through conversations. So I think that's the challenge that kind of faces us, really.
And I didn't touch on that they don't have any experience on fundraising. That's not what they do, and they find, the comment we always get is this takes so much longer than we thought it would. And it almost, we're doing another round at the moment with one of them and said we're going to stick to exactly the same type of structure, everything we did first time, because we know what we did wrong and what we could have done, just to make it simple. And so doesn't exist. Yeah.
So I suppose one of the outtakes that maybe we could all see from this is to put together a program to educate these early start companies as to how to best raise capital, sort of like a school of capital raising, because they can instantly get back on the business. You've got it.
Just I think those systems exist to some extent. I think the entrepreneurs have trouble finding time to do a lot of that. And it's also what we drive into is we're really sometimes very simple about who we invest in. It's, do we like you? Do you tick the boxes? And we usually, a couple of us select who wants to work on the DD process. And if we don't like that person, we either take ourselves off that process, individuals, or we just don't invest because, and we have a couple of criteria, they're simple, and that you can't put a score sheet against it. It's are they coachable is one of the first things we look at, and we've been learning along the way, and so we're fairly new and not as experienced as most of you around the table, but there's it's how you actually can get engagement, and the learning process can happen a lot faster. So, but I'd be interested to hear who else is doing.
So from my perspective as a founder and who have gone through a number of rounds of funding on all types, I jumped in without knowing anything about fundraising. Now, 5 or 6 years on, I have got a lot of friends who are in the same space, and it's surprising how many people don't know anything about fundraising, nothing at all. And a lot of the books and the brokers and the people that advise them, they themselves were not the fundraisers. They are brokers, but they've never gone through the actual startup founder journey to fundraising. And fundraising isn't just about the mechanics of fundraising itself. It's understanding what type of funding is good for a company. Operational, do you go for debt? Do you go for equity? When do you go for it? Just telling some new founder, a templated playbook and say, if you're going to found a company, learn A, B, C, D, X, Y, Z. This is how you found a company. I don't believe that that's going to work. I believe what's going to work is actually people, learning and having a mentor. And now, initially when I thought about the importance of mentor, I was told that you gotta have a mentor, and I didn't quite understand what that meant. But now that I'm actually mentoring some of my friends and into fundraising process, I realize that these are experiences that you cannot just learn. You have to live through it. But knowing that, if there's someone helping you along the way, it's a lot, very, very helpful. And
do you think it's part of a rite of passage of being a good entrepreneur, or do you think we're actually losing people out of the process because of it?
I think we're losing.
You think we are? Okay.
Yeah, I think we are losing. I mean, it's not that I have a solution for it. I'm just stating the fact that I've met a couple of really, really brilliant entrepreneurs. The idea is amazing, but just because their inability to focus their time on the fundraising and inability to see themselves from a different vantage point, that you are not just a doer, you're a captain of the ship. You're responsible for making sure that the ship is fully filled up. And a lot of the cases, the young founders, I like to think I'm young, but I'm not young anymore these days. I've always thought, but if you, not when you're hiring people in their early 20s and celebrating the 21st birthday. But so what I've done in these recent months is, we're sort of on our fourth fundraising right now. We are halfway through our fundraising, and I have actually taken initiative to teach my staff, who's got no relation with anything at all, because they're 21, 22-year-olds, very passionate about the business. They're passionate, but they don't know first thing about financing. So every time I have a meeting with VC, or and the thought process, I will do a all hands every Monday morning. I teach everybody in our staff, whether you're customer support or the financing, because I don't have time to teach other people, unfortunately. But I think I can set aside 30 minutes every Monday morning to teach all these young up and coming possible entrepreneurs the art of financing, or the need to focus and just learn the ropes. So I've introduced them to the books. What was that? how to be better than your
Venture
lawyers.
deals.
Yeah, venture deals. I've explained to them the whole concept of safe. I've explained to them the whole concept of convertible notes. No one knows, they hear all this, but they don't know how it actually fits in. So I'm doing that because I wish someone else had told me this before. I wish that when I was exploring, someone else actually told me, why do you go for convertible notes? Because it blah blah blah. So
Very interesting.
yeah.
That's a cool approach. I like that. I just wanted to give them that a chance. I was just interested to know, Matt, whether you think, equity crowdfunding actually solves for some of that problem, or does it create an equally different set of challenges and learnings for people who are going down that capital raising path?
Yeah, look, I think it definitely does have a role to play in solving some of these issues. Sometimes I describe what we do. So we run to a 10-week process through an equity crowdfunding campaign. It's like a mini accelerator for a business. It's probably the most intense period of effort. And it's not just about the capital raising, it's marketing, it's thinking really critically about their business.
Proper campaign, right?
Absolutely. And we're seeing them better businesses on the back end. They've got funding, they've crystallised their thoughts about their business and their strategy and what their goals are moving forward. They have an engaged audience of investors to help them support the business, particularly in the consumer sense. But just like having a think, around here, there's definitely work to be done in terms of educating founders on the fundraising process, but I'm not convinced that, and sorry to pick up on what you said about rite of passage, but I'm not convinced necessarily that this is a good thing, that this should be, a hard thing for people to go through, and by getting through the other side, you're kind of anointed because you've been through this, you've got the battle scars and you're a better founder. I think we should be making this easier, I think, and this certainly picks up on some data that LaunchVic is working on at the moment with educating the universe of angel investors, but I think that's really where our focus needs to be. And naturally I've got a bias as a platform that deals with largely retail investors, but I suppose the vision that we've got is that when people are catching up at barbecues, they're talking about the startups that they've invested in, that it just becomes something that permeates our culture. Because the funds, the later stage investment, it's not appropriate to invest in the majority of the businesses that we see. Not all of them will succeed, and I think we need to be comfortable with that. And it's really rewarding working at this super early stage of the market, because there are some really inspirational people. And not all of them will succeed, but it's an exciting ride.
Yeah, I was just going to echo that what we found a lot, particularly in the deal pad days, was founders, you're sort of selecting for people who are naturally good salespeople at selling their business, and you sort of have this disconnect between founders who are really good at selling their product to their end user, but don't know how to convert that into a different conversation with an investor about, well, this is how the business actually, this is how the money machine works, and this is why you want to be part of the journey. And what it ends up doing is it selects for networks, or it selects for that specific skill, and that's the founder set that you end up creating, if that makes sense. And so there's sort of still an opportunity, I think, for a lot of different diverse founders who might be experts in their area but unable to have that conversation, who are missing out effectively in the ecosystem. And I think it's a problem we're going to address.
I think the diversity piece is something, I think we could probably touch on it a bit later, but I think there's a lot of bias that helps people through the funnel based on pattern recognition and all that sort of stuff. I just wanted to ask, particularly Ben and Nick, if any of that resonates with you in terms of making this process easier, or do you think it's actually challenging for a reason when we're talking about venture capital investment?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think we've been doing a lot of thinking about this lately in terms of where we play, where we help, and what we can do, because we love meeting founders really, really early on their journey, even if it's just not going to work for an investment with us now, which hopefully isn't, to your point, hopefully isn't a waste of their time, and hopefully it's
How can I be helpful? Just kidding.
and so it's little things at those early stages, like making just one connection for them, or giving them some really useful feedback if you're saying no, or you want to stay in touch, rather than just saying no and sort of walking out of the room. But I
which is actually a huge, it's a cost to the VC's time. It's a very busy kind of environment, and to be that generous does actually require a lot of extra effort on the part of the VC, right?
Yeah, it
to
does.
go that extra mile.
But I think it's so valuable because it just has this cascading flow-on effect if you can help that. And there are going to be some things that we do in the future to more directly help at that really early stage that we don't do today. But a couple of points that I think are worth making. One is that just on the rite of passage comment as well, I think there are so many businesses that shouldn't raise venture capital. And we love it when an investor a founder really understands what they want to achieve and what their ambition is. And a lot of the time, that ambition or that desire for what they want to build isn't going to align with what we want to build alongside them for our investors. And we're very upfront about that, and we kind of explain that process to them. But I think that education, a lot of that needs to go towards what makes sense for your business. You made that point before, then it's like sometimes what people really just need is a great conversation to point them in the right direction or to give them a different perspective. Sometimes they genuinely need equity funding. Sometimes they might just need one parcel of equity funding to get them on their way, and they're going to be a profitable business, and it's going to be a steady growing business, and who knows where that ends up, but it could be really, really exciting for that founder, but it might not work out for us. And we just want to encourage that a little bit more because there are a lot of businesses that are well suited to venture, and we will find those businesses and spend a lot of time with those founders. But there's equally important as this huge groundswell of fantastic people working on businesses that aren't suited to the sort of rocket fuel approach that venture is well known for.
And we're really only just emerging from the dark ages of funding in Australia, where we've really only had a small amount of venture capital. Now we have more VC, but we also have the availability of debt funding. We have equity crowdfunding, more liquid in terms of retail investing and all that sort of stuff. So it's probably just going to take some time for the hero factor of venture funding to be, the shine might come off a little bit when people see what other options are available, perhaps.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say is that if you look at established ecosystems like Silicon Valley and Boston and Israel and other parts of the world, they don't compete on that kind of base layer, if you will. All the things that people need to know, all the conversations that people need to have to kind of, in an informed way, get started and get going, that's just available. It's all available. In Australia, there's still a bit of competition and tension at that layer, and not enough visibility of where you're supposed to go and who you're supposed to talk to. We all need to just step up and start doing more.
I think that raising the first institutional round can be challenging. Obviously, it's pretty well agreed. But I think that's the case because it's the first step in the journey of maturation of a lot of different parts of the business. So a lot of the time you're coming in and you've had friends and family, or you've had very early stage seed or angel investing, and a lot of the time the folks that you've got money from, they believe in your story, but they also aren't. They're not helping you on your journey from an operational perspective or a governance perspective in the same way that sophisticated institutional investors will. And for the less informed, or those that haven't had a sort of mentorship that is really great from experienced founders, it comes as a shock. Because it's this sudden step up in what's required to be a mature company. I have a board of directors, we have to meet every couple of months. Suddenly I'm not completely in control of every aspect of my business. I've got people giving me advice on how to grow that business, and I think it's just that the process to get from sort of the level you're at to the level to that starting stepping stone on that journey can be quite a jump. And I think that that jump, that first step, can be improved definitely by either having conversations really early, which is something that VCs generally love to do if you can, by being introduced. Hopefully there's VCs kind of like Ben and Ben introduce you to good earlier stage investors that are a bit more sophisticated and can help you along that journey, or it's through that mentorship with people that have been through this journey and they know they can close that maturity gap so that they can start putting, say, strong governance in place early on, and so that it's a little less challenging for when you start taking institutional investment.
Just like to return to one of these points, which I think is critical here, is this concept of mentorship. I think as a founder who's been through successive capital raising rounds over the years, and through my role on the board of Fintech Australia, I've been fortunate enough to join a number of boards, and joined one actually this week as chair. And regardless of what the business does, when I was unpicking and unpacking the business, I realised they hadn't got a clue about this whole capital raising round. And I was able to sort of slightly nudge them into a sort of slight little pivot. And in fact, the first piece of advice I gave them was stop thinking about raising capital for 9 months. Double down, cut your costs, find a way to survive and win, and then come out of that at the other end in much better shape. And the shoulders dropped and their stress levels reduced, because someone was saying to them, you don't have to go out and fight the fight with everyone else and be a superstar, rock star, the winner. You just need to focus on your business, then get yourself in shape. So I think one of the things for all of us to do is to embrace that sort of information layer as we go up the pipe. And for us, in the credit story, equity crowdfunding was amazing, because one thing we got out of it was we got an offer doc. We had a statement in time. So as you go through the stages, mentoring, I think, can lay alongside that very well. So if we can shallow a hold of a mentorship in our ecosystem, I think a lot of that friction will go away.
I'm going to change tack slightly, but I thought I'd just throw it out to the audience if there are any questions related to the conversation we have been having to this point. Yeah, Katrina.
Good morning, my name is Katrina Donahue. I'm CEO and co-founder of Civic Ledger, so I'm Brisbane-based. I'd like to acknowledge this room. Thank you so much for facilitating this fantastic, informative roundtable. Tim, you just made the perfect comment. This is exactly the challenge of startups, is that there is so much hype, we're under so much pressure to do wins and killing it and things like that, and we're on this tension about how do we build great businesses that are sustainable and scalable, and going on this fight for fundraising. And that is the biggest problem we have in this country is startups. I've come out of fish burners, so I've been through the rounds, I've been through watching my fellow startups killing themselves, trying to be, wearing the hoodies and the t-shirts and doing all that sort of stuff and doing the pictures on Friday nights. So I have a question around the role of government. I notice there's no government at this table who are putting in millions of dollars to foster the startup ecosystem. And I'd like to challenge, I know they're not here, but I'd like to challenge whether their hundreds of millions of dollars is actually killing the startup ecosystem or enabling the startup system. And what role that this room feels about leveraging the funds out of government. Like, for example, Advanced Queensland has spent $800 million. Yet I look at those figures that you've put up about Queensland and we're performing terribly. Why is that so? But I'd just like to acknowledge, and I guess my question is, your role of mentoring. If you were to be able to grab a startup at the early stages, what would be your best advice to them?
Thanks, Katrina. Matt, you made a comment particularly about Victorian government's efforts in the space. Do you have any more you wanted to add on what they're doing and whether you see it as helpful or harmful from a...
Just wanted to jump in on the data side.
Yes.
One of the issues we have is our data is only from publicly available sources. And so if you look in Queensland, you've got the Business Development Fund. They keep announcing that they're making investments. The size of those investments is never mentioned. So we have, there's a lot of zeros against Queensland for those investments. We pick them up, but there isn't a number that we can put next to it, so we can't show where Queensland's sitting in the context of Australia. There's other deals that are done by some of the large VCs that are sometimes not disclosed. I recall a Q Control had obviously a big investment, because there were a couple of US VCs involved, and they only write big checks. So I'm guessing the round was around 20 mil. But it wasn't yours? That was you, right? Yeah. So
It was 15.
15. Okay. So that's a reasonably big number that isn't in our data because it wasn't disclosed. Sometimes there's good reasons not to disclose, but I think the ecosystem benefits from knowing what's going on.
Sorry, to answer your question, like Launchvic is doing a lot of great stuff, deploying resources to, very kind of targeted areas where they think the ecosystem can be enhanced. And at the moment, there's a real focus on formalising angel networks, and Scala does a lot of really great work in this space, but there's not many like you, and there needs to be more. And I think, thinking really critically about the ecosystem, how it can be enhanced and how it can support, startups and founders is really good. And, we'd like to think that we, as an equity crowdfunding platform, have a role to play in formalising some of these early stage investors as well. And, it's not all of these businesses, I completely agree, are appropriate for VC funding, but not all of these businesses necessarily need to be wildly scalable. Some of them can be really good, profitable businesses. So I think we need to think, more creatively about what the new economy looks like, and what success looks like for a business, because they can't all be unicorns, multi-unicorns. But what will the economy of the future look like? And if we enable funding and capital at these really early stages, then it's okay to have a really profitable business that addresses a targeted niche that's not going to be necessarily a global business.
I'll hand back to Vicky, but I guess it's the comment that you make is interesting, especially in the wake of a lot of less than successful IPOs and WeWork's impending doom and all the rest of it. There's a lot to be said for a cautionary tale around this idea of a unicorn or mega unicorn status. And actually, is venture economics going to look the same in Australia as it does in the US, or are we going to have 8 out of 10 really high performing kind of 5x companies versus 8 failures and 2 10x, which is an interesting question. Vicky?
So back to your question about government and their role. One of the questions I'm always asking is, who are these people in government and what's their background, experience, capabilities? And we talked about that before around the table in different ways. And I don't know the answer to that. I'm not saying they don't have it, but it's this fantastic initiative, and geez, we need this money. They're startups, especially at early stage. They definitely need the money. They need the infrastructure many times, but there's a lot of capability. So just from the scale perspective, we are the early stage people, and we try really hard to mentor and all. It's not like we don't call ourselves mentors, but we call ourselves. And once you're a deal lead, you're basically married to the company for the next while, because you're the first point of call. Your money is in there as well. We don't put in big licks of money. We're kind of small-time players, but that's why we're early stage and we're angels. And so what I'd probably like to see and understand as well is, how can we get the government people involved? And I think, Matt, you're in that space a bit more, to support and not so much have a hands off, but and they do, when you get them and they're not busy and mad running around, and to be efficient and to say, here's the people you need to talk to. I'm backing out because I don't know what I'm doing, or I can't add any more value, but I know how to get you there, and talk to A, B and C. Pull up Jane or Jill or Jemima for or Jack, because we have a few blokes around too, and to be your support. And so that's how we get to that. So back to the government, I think we just need them to keep being involved and put their money in.
I would say, just from the New South Wales perspective, given that I think I'm the only representative from New South Wales here, I guess some of the things that they've done quite successfully. Oh, sorry. I've now in Melbourne, it just comes together. I think that the MVP grants that New South Wales government offers, it's like a 25k, those things can make quite a difference to people at that early stage, who just need a product to be able to show before they're going further with that. But also the infrastructure piece from a government perspective, the Sydney Startup Hub has without question been had a huge impact on our local ecosystem. And if you have anything else to add there, fellow Sydney Startup. Sorry, Lily.
So I think, and I'll take a bit of a capitalist view here, I think that if the role of government, I don't think should be to pick winners, but I think that the money that goes out there and that has been really successful is in providing infrastructure to support the startup ecosystem. Some of those grants aside, but I think that where the infrastructure is, the startup hubs or whatever events to try and bring other members of this ecosystem together. I think that's what's really, really positive. That's where you get sort of the nice medium of government being able to support things, but without
getting their hands.
Right, without having to be trying to play VCs or play angels and actually pick winners in that market.
Possibly the most destructive aspect about that is this state game that we continue to play rather than having a national approach. And the fact that Queensland's ecosystem has been a little bit more opaque perhaps than others. How do we actually kind of start to create less of those boundaries? That's right. Yeah. It's a national approach.
I guess that's the challenge for us, is that we're always seen as, who's competing with who against the state governments. And you're right, I think they should be investing in infrastructure, but also the policy frameworks will mitigate the ability to innovate. So it's more than, so I guess it needs to be a holistic approach, because VC funding is amazing, but it can also, if you're not getting enough money in the room, it can also stifle or take the startup into consideration. So I I question, and I think that's what we're going through in Queensland, is to say, what is the role of as Queensland? I think the idea is that if you come off those grants, you fly out the city. And I think that's what we're heading to now, is to say, if those grants are not available, will the startup ecosystem still thrive?
William?
I think obviously the government has a crucial role to play, but it is very limited. I think we have to look deeper fundamentally on the culture, and someone needs to start the culture. So when I was in San Francisco, the first thing I've noticed is that no matter who you talk to, they were very comfortable about talking about financing. They were very comfortable about things about startup, and they were comfortable about giving somebody heartwarming advice without expecting something back. There was a true giving culture, and it was very ingrained in the whole ecosystem. And what I've noticed is that back here in Australia, when you talk to people, it's almost a taboo subject. You don't talk about startups, and always you're just trying to show. And whenever I catch up with friends, that they talk about good things. Yeah, I'm doing well. I'm doing well. You're not doing well. And I tell them, you're not doing well. You've been 7 years and you're still making that. You're not doing well. Get real. And the thing is, over here we talk about what have you done over the weekend. Yeah, I had a beer with my mates, had a barbecue, we had a watch game, but people don't talk about this sort of true, real hard things, and it scares them. So culturally there's an issue, right? Whereas in other more thriving places, people are more willing to give up their time, not expecting. So I was someone like that too. In the early years, I was very busy. I don't have any single minute to even talk to other people. Whereas these days, I'm taking a very different view and said, I have to give something back. And realizing that I'm actually, in one of the top 1% company. 1% company that we're in here, and I'm like, hang on a minute. I have moral obligation to at least tell or spend some time to tell these people, and hopefully when they find someone else, they will pay it forward. So I think it's very unrealistic to force these young founders or people to say, hey, give up your precious time for some other people. But what I think is going to happen is, as VCs are investing more into the startup, and as the whole ecosystem matures, and as people are becoming more wealthy and the companies are thriving, then they will find this time. Of course, you have to sort of encourage them. You have a lot of time. You've made it. Please pay forward. So I think if we can target those top performing businesses, top performing startups, if VCs could lend a hand and reach out to their top performing startups, their portfolio companies, and say, hey guys, I want you to pick 3 other founders and spend one-on-one with them at least once a month. Do that. I think VCs will be in for a nice treat this way, because if at the end of the day, you make your money, LP's money, if your deal flow is quality, high quality. So I think it's not going to happen overnight. But I believe that somebody has to, and it is a place like this in a round table that I'm championing, because let's do something. Let's change the behavior, set a KPI. It's very easy for you. Pick up the phone, call one of you guys and say, hey, Jack, from AOL, it's Jack. Spend the time with someone, just 10 minutes. Your 10 minutes is worth $10 million to us in the next 10 years, because somebody would have added that value to the whole ecosystem.
We're already doing that.
Yeah, amazing. So I also think that this has got to do with the whole, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When founders are so busy running around treadmills, you don't have time to think about others. Survival. You need to survive. If you survive long enough till tomorrow, then you might do something that you want to do. So it's just a natural thing, but we can help the government and the VCs can accelerate this process, and hopefully we will get there not too far behind from Silicon Valley or the other parts of the world.
Reese?
So I'm just I can make a comment on the government part of that, which is, I don't think I envy any of the state or federal or city governments in Australia's position at the moment, which is effectively, everyone knows that they want to have a Silicon Valley, a London, an Israel. Those all came from very specific kernels that weren't one thing, they were a bunch of things. Like, it was cheap to start a silicon factory in California, so they did, and then there was a lot of engineers in one area with cheap rent, so you could start something in your house and da da da. And so every government's like, well, I want that. What are so they're all just scattergunning, trying to find the thing that cracks it. And it's I don't think they'll hurt the startups, but I don't think you should build yourself around what the incentives are. The incentives help, like lots of startups have survived or gone far enough because the right tax incentive was there that allowed them to hire engineers, or the right grant was there that allowed them to just get that little bit further, or the right program started that put them in contact with a serendipitous mentor that helped them work themselves out. So I think the government's not going to solve the problem, but they're all just going to be scattergunning for a while to try and find something that makes them the Silicon Valley of Australia. Hopefully, I hope to Melbourne personally, because I don't want to move, but I think that's probably what you're going to find with government policy, right, which is that there is no model for them to go, oh yeah, we'll just do what London did, we'll just be the centre of an empire for 1,000 years, and then it'll be really easy. So I think that's going to be a continuous problem.
Start with ICOs in particular. We've seen a bit of a pullback from last year, but William, I wanted to throw to you to talk a little bit about Liven's experience earlier this year. You were originally raising what you were calling an ICO, but eventually, from more of a marketing perspective, reframed it into a token sale, which created a great impact for you guys. What do you think about the kind of ICO market at the moment?
So I think the whole ICO is totally confused.
Yeah.
Both the people who are doing the ICO, people who are writing about the ICO, who are reading about the ICO. The whole thing was a total fiasco. Because ICO, initial coin offering, they've just taken the P out of IPO and put the C in there. And everyone was jumping in, and I'm guilty as charged in the sense that initially I've started with what's ICO, it's alternate form of funding, but then I realized within the 3 months that this is wrong. It's totally not what I expected. There were businesses raising millions and millions with off the back of white paper, and there was no substance. And that's why it's called ICO, initial coin offering. So what we have done is...
You've already been running your business.
We have been running, yeah. So Liven as a payment tech. So the reason why it made sense for us is we already had our digital currency. So people go to the restaurants, they'll pay with the app, and they'll earn digital currency. And then the digital currency is simply on a normal database-based traditional database-based, accounting entry, whereas ICO, or the people wrongfully call it ICO, the technology underpinning the ICOs, which is the blockchain, is just yet different types of database. There's decentralized. So I'm not going to use all the buzzwords because I think it's rubbish. But fundamentally, what we have realized is that we're not doing ICO. We're actually just converting or creating, or rather encapsulating the value of which was just, wasn't apparent. We were already creating value by by asking someone to go to a restaurant and spend the money, and thereby providing the digital currency. We were creating the value already. So we didn't need to create something out of thin air. We just had to encapsulate that, package that, and change the underlying technology to be more blockchain-based. Hence, it wasn't initial coin, it was more token sale. Also, our lawyers, being an ex-lawyer, I had to be very mindful of what I do, and our lawyers were very forward-thinking about what we want to do in the future. So I think a lot of regulators knew about the ICO. It just took them 2 years to figure things out and implement the policies that has caused this whole ICO craze to subside. Yeah. So
is your prediction that if others can arrive at that same conclusion, we'll start to see more of these token sales in the future as a viable source of funding?
I think not. I think token sale is I don't believe it's a viable alternate source of funding. I don't think it's suitable for 99% of the businesses. It's not. I believe it is very unique to especially because the whole blockchain tokenization model is about reward. You mine, you do work for someone else, i.e. running your own computer, provide computing resources, and you earn some form of digital reward, which has some value through the secondary market. If you are not in the business of providing reward for some sort of work, then you shouldn't be in the business of selling any form of token. In our company, Livent was uniquely positioned in a sense, every time someone does the work, which is going to a restaurant, spending money, making the business, helping the business bottom line, that's the work that we reward the users. So at the end of the day, the payment loyalty fit in very well to the whole blockchain sphere. Whereas other businesses, running, let's say, a bot, tokenizing a massive $20 million bot and selling it, it's no different from selling equity crowdfunding, but they put the tokenization. I think that's just all rubbish. Yeah.
And how is that different to me earning QFF points rather than tokens?
Well, tokens are inherently tangible and limited, and that depends on the token design. Qantas is a monopoly. Qantas can print billions and billions and billions of points and devalue.
No, they can't actually. They have to be able to sell them for a value to the actual supplier of them. So when you get QFF points, somebody's paying for them.
Yeah.
So how is that different?
What I mean is that they can sell infinite number of quantified points. Infinite.
No, they can't. They have to have a product that gets transacted, like you're talking about, so that actually can have the points issued. They're not infinite. They have a value, and there's a specific number of them that are traded for when I go, say, to the supermarket and spend my money on my Woolies products and Woolies, and then paying Qantas for my Qantas frequent flyer points, and they're not infinite. It has to do with how much I spend.
I understand. So I think I oversimplify this. When I meant infinite, I meant the type of Qantas frequent flyer point. There is no technical barrier, a technical limitation as to how far this can go. If 1,000 Woolies join and do exactly the same thing, the Qantas frequent flyer point theoretically has no limit. Yeah. Whereas, and this is the same with the government. Government theoretically has no barrier to how much money it can print. Modern money theory, you keep printing and printing. You create your own currency, you create your own debt. and you stimulate the economy, you tax them, bring it back. But the governments do that. Only thing they have to watch for is inflation, right? Because if inflation goes crazy level, then you've screwed the whole economy. Whereas in blockchain space, it's exactly capped. So every time a token circulates around the block, around the world, it has a inherent value that appreciates because of the inherent supply constraint. And that means the typical problem that the governments face with inflation, there is no such problem when it comes to blockchain, because no single entity controls that.
It's talking Bitcoin, not blockchain.
No, blockchain technology.
Bitcoin is blockchain. Okay, so
Currency.
Okay, so
Built on the blockchain.
I've invested in a blockchain business, nothing to do with Bitcoin.
No.
Right? So I understand.
Yeah.
I'm being
Sure. No. I totally understand. So I don't think I should spend, because we're not talking about Bitcoin, blockchain. Yeah. So blockchain is the fundamental infrastructure laying underpins the whole Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple, everything, right? So my point there was that for us, it made sense. 99% of the company didn't make sense. In the future, I don't believe there will be any more large ICOs anymore, because the governments are now moving in and trying to protect the retail investors. And I firmly believe that retail investors who have no idea about this need to be protected from most of the unregulated ICOs.
I wanted to now throw to Matt and to Tim, particularly about the equity crowdfunding side of things. We've seen it as a very small percentage still. I think it was about 1%, tiny. Yep.
And we don't. We haven't captured every single equity crowdfunding deal because we're focused on startup and tech. So the number that you 30 something mil.
36 million.
36 million. We don't have anywhere near that reported because there's a lot of businesses that just don't fit.
Okay, great. That makes sense. Thank you for clarification. So I guess in terms of your prediction, perhaps, Matt, on the growth in this segment from a tech perspective as an alternative source of funding, or is it actually always going to kind of lean towards more of the real life businesses, if that's a way to describe them?
Look, I might just start first by making a couple of comments about ICOs and blockchain, because
We didn't get enough. No, just kidding.
but just, I suppose, as it relates to equity crowdfunding and more, I suppose, traditional alternative sources of finance. But it was pretty tough for us waiting for legislation to come in to regulate the equity crowdfunding space. And I think that vacuum was filled by ICOs for a period of time. And, we needed to have this kind of firm resolve that what we were doing was the right thing, that this was the correct way to fund these businesses to operate within a regulatory regime. And this 99% comment, as a lawyer myself as well, I was watching the development of that space and just thinking, it is just such a narrow use case when you think, properly about the regulation of a managed investment scheme regime and how wide the regulatory regime here in Australia, that yes, it will have a very limited utility, and it was just that the law couldn't catch up. So our view always philosophically has been that there are regulatory objectives, it is right, whether the way that the law actually does it, that's always up for debate, but operating within the bounds of the law will kind of serve the broader economy. In terms of the outlook for equity crowdfunding, we look to the UK and how the UK has developed. We think naturally that consumer businesses that have a strong consumer proposition are the ones that are supremely positioned to do well. It's not just craft breweries, it's consumer tech, it's a range of things, but certainly we expect that over the next few years Australia will similarly be turning over hundreds of millions of dollars annually through equity crowdfunding platforms.
Peter?
Just Well, Australia's got a peculiar equity market. The ASX has some very small. I'm from Western Australia. Resources stocks, exploration companies, early stage tech that is listed, grown up on the ASX rather than exiting. Prosper's grew up before it went to the ASX, whereas Afterpay grew up on the ASX. And we've seen more of that from WA. We don't have a VC industry. Do you think that the way the ASX works, and in terms of the ability to do very early stage companies and the sort of size rounds they're doing in placements, and there's a lot of placements that are happening that are well over the $5 mil mark. So do you think Australia's stock exchange is going to impact on how big equity crowdfunding can grow in Australia?
There are a lot of costs to be a listed company. So the governance requirements for being converting to a public structure, even if you're unlisted, are significant. And we know this because you needed to be a public unlisted company for most of last year if you wanted to use the crowdfunding regime. And that was the headwind that we were facing, the difficult thing to convince people to accept to use the regime. So opening it up to proprietary limited companies, it's massive. Like, we have this new class of company now, a crowdsourced funded company, which can have a potentially unlimited number of shareholders, which is a really fundamental change to corporate law and this notion that companies need to be closely held. So there are a lot of advantages of staying private and doing a crowdfunding round. And again, I think particularly for a consumer, a business that has a strong consumer proposition, that this is a more attractive way of raising capital than perhaps listing. But we like to think that in some companies it's in their destiny to move up to ASX or one of the other markets. Like that will still happen. But I suppose we don't really see them as as a competitor or a constraint on growth at the moment, because we're very clear in terms of the value that we can provide to these really early stage businesses. And we are focused on the super early stage because we think that's where the biggest opportunity is.
Reece, I want to come back to you because I know that's a good segue, but I just wanted to get Tim to talk a little bit about why you chose the equity crowdfunding. I'm not letting go of this microphone.
Okay, for full disclosure, both my parents are lawyers, but I'm not a lawyer. We got approached about 18 months ago now to go through the West Australian two-step, which is basically what a broker pitches up with a shell company. And they stick you into this lovely little shell, and they tell you that they're going to collapse your capital table, but you're going to get a whole lot of options downstream with some very sort of shonky little objectives, so you get your company back. And by the time you go through that, you're locked in, they've exited, and you go, what the hell happened? And you're just burning through $400,000 a year of ASX listing cost. So when I went through the term sheet, I spell checked the word IPO out of it about 35 times, when I clearly said, we may not IPO within a time frame that is within this document, and we just exited from that piece because it was just going to be too hard and it would have killed our business. So we took the route of going down equity crowdfunding because the product set we have is very much built its own fan base. People are lending money to friends and family who've got money, so why would we raise it from that audience? So it made critical sense for us. And I think the sense, because we were on a panel yesterday with Matt, which came through from that, is I think what you're going to see in the equity crowdfunding space is, because it's really hard, it's brutally tough on a business. There's a lot of grunt that you have to put to it, and there's a lot of learnings you have to go through to pull one of those things off. Is that a lot of the companies there are going to do successive and third rounds. So as a company, Credit very much looks forward to doing another equity crowdfunding round and building on the platform we've had. So there's almost a kind of two streams that are going to be taking place here, and these sort of like train tracks, for want of an analogy, are kind of run a little bit more in parallel into a little bit of a distance. And then of course we'll look across where we intersect out of that and all the rest of it. And we're seeing the size of the deals that equity crowdfunding is pulling off. Virtuals have killed it this year. I mean, congrats, it's been massive. And that then gives the companies the encouragement that there is a trajectory. Because a year ago, it was like, no one's going to raise more than $600,000 through equity crowdfunding. So what happens if only 3 million or 5 million? So as that nascent sort of audience grows, so from a founder with a company in that space, I think will suck up the costs that we've sunk into the process and double down and go again, and then review after that.
How does it change your kind of reporting requirements? Not being a listed company, but now having a wider base of, thinking like that.
The question we had yesterday was, what did you get out of that? And it forces your company to grow up really quickly. So the first thing you have, which is great, VC told along and said, hey guys, you guys are fantastic. I've got an offer document that I can slap on the table and say, well, 4 months ago, it went through a degree of diligence that gave the financials, it gave the board, it gave the capital table, it gave the use of funds, it gave the summary of the business. So, there you go, that you can read that and you can get quickly up to speed exactly where we were as a moment in truth last year. We obviously now have our shareholding structure on a digital platform, so we've got 150 shareholders now that sit on a digital platform. So, I can just send an email around to each shareholder in 10 seconds. So we have monthly emails that go around. So our communication, investor relations readiness, for want of a better say, is much, much higher. In fact, we're joining a couple of these platforms together, whereby somebody actually could want to invest in credit, and it's an end-to-end process straight to registering that transaction with ASIC. End to end, we wouldn't even see the transaction. So we're cutting out that friction that says they then have to ring you up, they then have to subscribe, you then have to get a check, and you have to do. So there's a lot of automated technology that is helping the companies that are in that space manage their lives. So it's going very, very quickly actually. There you go.
Reece, I just wanted to talk about, I guess, are you seeing companies that have had venture backing who are then going through the listing process, or they're already listed and sort of went direct to the ASX without going through any of the private capital raising? Is there a percentage balance that you're seeing?
I wouldn't have the stats specifically on that, but I think just to give some context in the ASX, usually when people talk about it, we think about the top 200. There's 2,000 other companies. That's where the majority of capital raising is occurring. The average size of the placement on the ASX is 8 mil. We're not talking about $300 million rounds, like say what a Afterpay would do, are not the average. They're the outlier, right? So and we've lots of companies who have listed on the ASX out of tech who are 50 million, like Appen, I think it was 48.7. They've then risen up into $1 billion company. To Ben's point earlier about there's the right kind of funding for what you are and the right kind of investor for what you need, if that makes sense. And Australia's quite fortunate in that the ASX and the regulatory environment that we're in means much more Australians participate in the share market than most other countries. Advantage of Telstra privatisation, Myers and AMP. But more participate, the requirements to run a capital raise in the ASX are better than other countries in terms of the level of prospectus you need to generate to go forward and the level of legal requirements. But obviously, if you're a small company, you shouldn't list. You should wait till you're the right size, you've got the right level of support, because you're taking on not just the requirements of a public company in terms of reporting, but you're taking on the responsibility of managing that level of communication and that support and network of your investors, which is a large, heady thing to do. So the ASX is phenomenal in Australia, and Australian companies tend to still list earlier than, say, their US counterparts, who have a much larger access to a much larger private, particularly now that the sovereign wealth funds are also all starting to just, SoftBank. But I mean, in terms of they're helping to keep companies private for longer, but there are a lot of advantages in Australia on the ASX and what it can provide in terms of the investor network that's available.
We only have 10 minutes left, and I wanted to come back to our traditional VC investors and angel kind of conversation. I guess looking at where the gaps are in funding still in the market. Obviously, we've seen the growth in the larger rounds. There still seems to be an availability of seed stage capital, but there's a drop based on the TechBoard data in the series. What I would say is kind of an average Series A, kind of around, I think, 5 to 10 was the band. Yeah, is that right? Sorry.
The 5 to 10 was the general rather than fintech.
Right.
The fintech gap seems to be a little bit
Yeah,
higher.
right.
I think it was the 15 to 20
Got
and
it.
the 50 to 100.
Okay.
Yeah, so also proportionally, the amount of early stage funding that we were picking up on is lower for fintech than it is for general, which is also interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe a question of the extent to which it's visible.
Yeah.
So maybe more triple F funding rounds rather than an early stage venture round.
Yep.
More mature founders who have more cash or better networks themselves. I'm not sure what that is. But.
Yeah, well, I'd love to kind of put it to particularly Ben, Nick, and Vicky, just whether we're seeing, companies are struggling to raise at that stage in the fintech space because we need more capital to create a viable business, in fintech specifically, or is there actually a bit of an absence of capital at that level as people are just moving up the register? I have another question that I'll throw in there, just around some of the micro funds that we're starting to see in market, but actually there seem to be a fair way of closing those funds. So actually there's an LP kind of challenge as well at that really early stage. Are we seeing anything interesting in that space? A lot of questions, but we've got 10 minutes, so go for gold.
Okay, so I guess the first one, I don't necessarily, from the sort of late seed or C plus Series A on up, I don't think there are gaps in the market, and I'm sure people will feel free to disagree with me, but what I think tends to happen is, just if you think structurally, if you are like NAV Ventures, you're investing in usually typically pretty early stage companies, and if you have successful companies or companies that have capital need going forward, as they need it, you invest. And so I think it's you need to think of it kind of flipped around on its head. It's where are companies' needs and at what stage, capital needs and at what stage are they? And there's a few things that may or may not be driving that. I imagine that there is a product of the part of the fintech as a product. It would be a product of the Royal Commission and a lot of opportunity that came out of around when the Royal Commission sort of started. So a lot of lenders come out of that sort of period of time, which is terrific to see. But they're hitting a maturity level where, particularly for the lenders, they're becoming they're quite a capital intensive sort of business, and so need to raise more and more capital at that particular point. But I don't think there's anywhere, particularly given that we're seeing larger funds coming up in Australia, such as Squarepeg, as well as getting attention from international funds coming into Australia and investing. We're getting that sort of attention levels. So I don't think there are massive holes in the market for. I mean, once you start getting above kind of a sort of a seed extension round.
So you think perhaps it's just in the last year, companies have just been at a different stage, there's been less raising at that level, perhaps is the explanation.
I think that's it, and I think it's a kind of a bit of a law of small numbers. Like we don't have thousands and thousands of folks trying to raise between 15 to 25 million. It's a
they're either side of that.
Right, like it's a pretty small number, so you're going to get some sort of fluctuation year to year, depending on what that looks like. Then jumping to the micro funds question, I mean, it's terrific to see more funds coming into the market. Micro funds will typically tend to be focusing on earlier stage investment.
What size are we talking about in terms of micro?
Yes, I'm thinking like 10 to 20, generally speaking.
Right, and so they're writing smaller checks, they're earlier stage, which I think helps the overall ecosystem. And I think there has, in Australia, traditionally been a bit of a gap in that market. So we've got some terrific angel investors, friends and family are obviously always supportive. And then when you start getting into this earlier sort of seed round, seed funding, I think that's where there's been often a bit of a gap, particularly from a professional investment perspective. And so I think it's terrific to see some of these earlier stage funds come through. That said, there's obviously a real challenge for those folks because raising funds is really hard. And so a lot of the time that's on a deal-by-deal basis that you have these funds. And then that raises all sorts of other issues, like you have to go out and get your LP money and try and convince your potential investor base that this is the deal for them. And so as they start forming funds because they have a track record, that makes them a bit more flexible with what they're investing in. I think that's really good. And what would actually be really great is as those funds start running into like a second fund, and you start getting $50 million funds, and so you can really start broadening out that ecosystem so that startups have more choice in the investors that they take money from, because that actually goes back to Katrina's question earlier, like what's some of the advice that if I was a mentor of a startup that I'd be giving, and it's probably to start thinking really hard about who your investors should be, like not just the money that they're going to give you, but like what value are they adding, and so start condensing your list down and focus your time earlier on a smaller number of investors that can genuinely add value, and start taking their advice as to what do they need. And as you get more of these micro funds that turn into smaller to medium-sized funds, you get more breadth and options for startups that thinking about who can add real genuine value to me as a startup.
In fact, one of the questions that we often ask ourselves is, why aren't you raising more? Or we ask the founder, why aren't you raising more? And they kind of are very reluctant to want to take more because they've worked out how much they think they need. They usually don't raise enough, but they don't raise too much less than what they need. So we're not in the microfund space. Like I've done it, I'll work individually with someone and go, okay, I've got some, play with it, let's do this together, and then when you come to something else, we'll worry about that later. And that's out of our hemisphere of scale, because that can be very difficult, the timelines for that can take a little bit longer than we'd all like, than both parties. So I think we find each other, whether it's at the VC end, when the founder has an idea of what they want, they find us, or they find the right funding partner. I hope.
Yeah. Ben, what is your kind of observations of that end of the market?
Yeah, I'll start at the microphone and work back to the other question. But I think Nick's comment really resonated with me around your first vintage, your first fund. It's just extremely difficult. Even if you're raising a really small amount, there are a lot of people who would like to jump in and raise a fund. And we get approached all the time by some of whether it's our LPs or entrepreneurs that we know, network, or former founders that we used to invest in.
Looking for you to be an LP in their, no.
Well, that has happened, but I mean, we don't sort of invest in other investors. We're just a lot of people who want to launch a small fund. And we don't discourage them, but we just inform them that it's going to be an extremely difficult process. And the reason why, I think, is number one, they've got no track record, and they're not often, or they're usually not investors by trade. So that's a skill they've got to develop. And then secondly, just the distribution of LPs, and where high net worth family offices. There are some folks who invest a lot who aren't necessarily called high net worth, but there's a distribution of where they tend to put their money, and it will always gravitate towards professional investors. So it's just really, really hard to fill that. But I think we've got some fantastic funds who are a little larger than that, like a Right Click or an EVP. Those guys are fantastic, and they provide it's like a really nice jump between angel investors to seed and Series A investors.
Do you think we need those smaller funds, or do you think actually that problem doesn't exist so much?
No, I think we need those small funds, because there's another reason as well, which is returns. And when your pool of capital is 30 million or 50 million, what you need in terms of returns and the types of companies you can back, to the point we were talking about earlier, about different types of businesses, different types of growth profiles and business models. There are some companies that we just can't look our investors in the eye and say we'll back that business, because it can't generate. We're absolutely in that cohort of venture funds that are looking for Powerball returns, and we're just really, really upfront about that. But there has to be investors that can back and have a similar time horizon, but back different types of businesses and require lower dollar returns. Otherwise, you don't have any diversity. You've just got the one or the other.
Pass or fail, yeah.
And then on the kind of whether there's any funding gaps in fintech, I agree with Nick. I don't think there is. I think there's a huge amount of interest. Particularly the last year, there's been some really large rounds. The neobanks are all starting to come to life, and basically they live on a funding treadmill. Right? They've got most of them have programs where they're, with the exception of 86400, which has a different ownership structure, they are basically raising capital constantly, and it's not particularly fun. Carries a very different return profile to, say, Athena, which is 1/20th of the capital intensity of a bank. But it's still capital intensive relative to software companies. So I think a lot of those companies are coming into maturity requiring much more capital. There are 700 odd businesses in fintech in Australia that are at various stages along the journey. Some require a lot of capital, some require very little, some are profitable, some are possibly on their way out. You know, there's a huge amount of diversity in there. And I think there's a good stable of funding options for all of them. I think the danger is that the limited data that we have drives folks to make, in particular government, but other folks as well, drives them to make decisions based on a reasonably short time frame. I think if we zoom out and apply a 5-year lens or a 10-year lens, I think things are in pretty good shape. I think the number one problem we would say with that list of 700 is the problems that they're trying to solve. And coming back to your question, Katrina, on you know, what would I say to a startup really early on is, you know, the problem that we're solving, focus really clearly on that and your customers and understand that deeply. And that's how you build a business. You don't build a business by raising money from VC. You build a business by serving your customers and be ambitious and look for things that aren't necessarily the low-hanging fruit. I think Australia is really well known for business model innovation, not so much for technical innovation. We're getting a lot better at that really quickly. But there are heaps of businesses that are just targeting really small pain points, and that they might be able to build a nice business doing that. But we, you know, and again, can't criticise that because there's a place for that. But you know, we certainly get very excited when people really go for it and target really difficult technical problems or large intractable problems. You know, large capital intensive models like lending that require first loss capital and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's really exciting.
With that, we're actually at time. So I'm sorry we didn't get back to the audience for questions, but I think most of our roundtable will be able to stick around for a little while to have individual questions. But it's been such an incredible amount of talent and experience in the room. I think it's been a really interesting discussion covering all perspectives. So please join me in thanking Vicky Papachristos from Scale Investors, Nick Baker from NAB Ventures, William from Liven, Matt from Birchall, Ben from, Reese, I skipped over you, Reese from Fresh Equities, Ben from SquarePeg, and Tim from Credit. And of course, thanks to Peter from
Lauren Capital Reinvention.
Thank you. Thanks everyone.